Hello, everyone, and welcome to the Work Podcast. I'm Kathy Taylor, U.S. Commissioning Editor for Work. Today's podcast is the second of our two-part series focused on the annual Most Contagious New York Conference, produced by our sister company, Contagious. Attendees at the event last month were able to get the inside scoop on the biggest campaigns of the year from the marketers and agencies responsible for the work. But if you couldn't make it, this podcast is for you. Later in today's episode, we'll talk with two of the presenters, one who worked on a campaign for Grubhub and another who worked on the famous, or some would say infamous, Solo Stove campaign featuring Snoop Dogg. But our first guest was the MC of Most Contagious, and because of that, he had the best seat in the house. I'm thrilled to welcome Chris Barth, Principal Strategist at Contagious, to the podcast.
Being a marketer isn't easy. You're constantly seeking buy-in for your ideas, defending your strategy, and looking for opportunities to do things better. To succeed, you need to inspire confidence and drive belief. The good news? You don't have to do it alone. When you partner with Work, the global authority on marketing effectiveness, we provide the data and strategic insights needed to build the boldness your business deserves. Visit work.com/advisory to learn more.
So, Chris, welcome to the Work Podcast.
Yeah, thanks for having me.
You were the MC of Most Contagious New York, as I think you always are. So what were your key insights and takeaways from the day once you see like a whole body of work for 8 hours?
Yeah, it's a good question. I think, we've been doing this now. I think we were counting, it's either 10 or 11 years, and we decided to say 10 because it sounds better, at least. It's a round number. So, and I, of course, have some bias, but I think this was one of our best yet, if not our best. And I think what made it feel so worthwhile as a day of content was the just well-roundedness of the speakers, the kind of breadth of topics that they covered. And I think, when I kind of zoom out and think about what were the big takeaways for me, I think, we talk a lot about the dichotomy and the pushes and pulls in the industry right now. And I think that really came to fruition in the day. We had talks that were, like Nutter Butter's talk, which was completely about leaning into absurdity and finding, these kind of really off the beaten track ways to connect with consumers. And then we had kind of more nuts and bolts presentations that were talking about, a more traditional campaign that might have been run. I think there was kind of a push and pull between that fun. And then also we had some really, moving, meaningful pieces of work that were discussed. And so seeing kind of the two sides of the coin of the industry was really interesting. And I think one of the talks that really crystallized that for me was Dr. Marcus Collins, who's a professor of marketing. He's, an amazing speaker. He's been here in the last 2 years speaking at Most Contagious. But he talked about culture in 2024 and talked about kind of balancing the idea of big cultural moments and impactful cultural moments. And I think that was also sort of a nice dichotomy of, we can go for scale or we can go for impact. And that's something that we juggle also, in marketing. And I think the other big dichotomy that I heard throughout the day, or the big kind of push and pull, was all about AI. We had a lot of speakers at least touch on AI, right? And I think there is still that push and pull of, is AI replacing human creativity? Is it unlocking human creativity? Is it just going to fade away? Is it going to change our lives forever? I think we're still in the sort of sussing out phase of AI, but that was definitely something that kind of came through throughout the day.
Yeah. And I think in terms of AI, it seems like it will be an eternal tension, right? Just like pretty much every technological thing that's come along, there's positives and negatives. And I wouldn't surprise me if a year from now we're wrestling with many of the exact same issues, but I don't know what your thoughts are.
Yeah, I think that's true. I think, for the first time, when I look back at the 10 years we've done this and the 12 years I've been at Contagious, I think there are always things that come up and become like the thing that everybody's talking about. And there are themes that come through at H Most Contagious that's like, wow, everybody was talking about like the metaverse, for example, or before that, everybody was talking about second screens, and so there's always some sort of dominant subplot, whether that's driven by consumer behavior or driven by technology. Often it's driven by technology. I think that the difference here is that this one seems to be kind of almost personally threatening a lot of the people in the room, right? Or at least some of the possible repercussions feel very personal to the audience. And so you can feel the room kind of tighten up during some of these talks as we're kind of trying to figure out what's going on with AI. And yes, it might fade away, but for the first time, I think it feels not just like, well, what are we going to be talking about next year? But Instead, how is this going to change my role, my job, my company in the next year and 5 years and 10 years?
Yeah, it's interesting because it's very different than, say, the dawn of the internet. But I remember those tensions at that time in the industry, and I don't know. It sort of goes through phases. Like, it's not going to be important. Oh, it might be important. Oh, it is important, and now I'm scared. And then it's like, I got to get on the train and be part of it. And so I sort of see that all happening again.
Totally, yeah. It does feel a little bit akin to the explosion of the internet. I think the interesting thing is that we're in a little bit of a boy who cried wolf scenario where everything has been hailed as the second internet, Web3 and all these different kind of movements that were going to change the way that everybody does everything. And, this time it certainly feels a little bit more real than it has in the past, but I think people are a little bit more hesitant than they would have been 10 years ago if something at this scale had come out.
One thing that I loved, or one bit of remarks that I loved, were yours at the very beginning of the show, talking about humor and the best way to use it. So can you walk us through what you at Contagious have really discovered about how to use humor effectively?
Yeah, I will say, humor in advertising is a topic that's really near and dear to my heart. It's, humor is what got me interested in advertising as a kid. I've always been interested in comedy, and I've done comedy in the past. And so I certainly perk up when people start to talk about humor in advertising. And it's something that we've heard more and more people talking about and more clients asking us about in the past couple of years. So we've spent some time looking at, how is humor being used in advertising and where is it successful? And I think the too long didn't read version is it's being used less and less, and it's being less and less successful. And so we tried to kind of uncover why that might be and what we can kind of do about it, because we do know that it's a very effective lever for advertisers to pull when you can make people laugh.
When you can pull it.
Immediately. Yes, exactly. It's a tricky one to pull, but when you pull it, the returns are worth it, right? Because people connect emotionally. They establish a rapport with the brand. They're more likely to come back to brands that use humor. People are attracted to brands that use humor. So I think what we have found and what we have noticed is, one, a lot of the advertising that's so-called humor advertising or funny advertising just isn't that funny, right? And you see this every day when you watch commercials. They're trying too hard. They're stretching some word play. I like to say it's kind of funny in the way that like a kid's joke book is funny, where it's like, yeah, well, it's clever. I can see where the humor would be, but it's not something that's going to make me laugh out loud.
But it wasn't executed.
Yeah, it's not something that I'm going to share with my friends because it's not actually real world funny. It's advertising funny. And that just isn't enough. But then I think the more insidious kind of trend that we see is that when brands are successful in making people laugh, often it's completely separated from the brand's position and what they stand for, their personality, the messaging that they're trying to connect with. So what ends up happening is you have these ads that are making people laugh that are completely divorced from the brand. And so people are going to go tell their friend, oh, I saw this funny ad. Here's the thing that happened. And they can do that without even mentioning, oh, it was an ad for such and such a product or such and such a brand. And so what we try to do is just kind of reinforce a little bit. You have to be funny, and here's how to think about humor. But then also, you really need to be thinking about, like, what are people going to remember from this, and how is it going to tie back to kind of building that long-term brand equity?
Well, as proof of what you just said, you showed an ad that was really funny involving all these mothers' texts getting broadcast through somebody's speaker. And I can't remember, even though it was the point of it, what the ad was for.
That's a great proof point. Yeah. So I showed the ad without the brand being shown. I asked anybody if they knew what the ad was for. And I think we had 2 hands in a room of hundreds of people come up. And I think it's, case in point, we can't even remember what the brand was now, just a couple weeks later. I won't name the brand because I don't want to name and shame, but I think it's a great example of, you can have an ad that's funny. You remember the premise, you remember what made you laugh. And the brand is just so separate from the core idea that, what impact is that actually going to drive for the brand? It may be a slight uptick in the 15 minutes after the ad airs, but for the most part, that's going to be a waste of money.
Yeah. Hint, audience. It's not a technology brand. That's all I'll say.
Not a connected home brand, although the joke is about a connected home device.
Yes. Can't thank Chris enough for being here on the podcast, and also emceeing a really great day of content.
Awesome. Thank you so much, Kathy. Thanks for having me.
Our Our next guest, hot off the Most Contagious stage, is George Bryant, Global Chief Creative Officer of Golan Harris. George will detail how Golan and Grubhub created a long-term loyalty play in a crowded category by tapping into something special, the powerful, personal moment when new mothers get to have their first post-birth meal. Welcome to the pod, George.
Lovely to meet you. Thank you for having me.
Yeah. So first, just walk us through the campaign that you presented at Most Contagious in as succinct a way as humanly possible, given that it was kind of complex in a lot of ways, but one big, simple idea.
Yeah. The idea we presented today was called Special Delivery. It's a campaign that we created, which we launched last August for Grubhub, one of our longer term clients. And the brief for the campaign was to cut through the commodity and short-termism that's rife in the delivery sector and create an idea that could engender loyalty in a heightened way.
Yeah. So tell me a little bit more about the category. I mean, we all, have those apps on our phones. They're kind of interchangeable to us. I mean, how does that express itself in terms of like numbers and how this brand war kind of plays out in the real world?
Well, there are two numbers that just paint a very vivid picture. The first number is $3 billion. That number is an estimate of the marketing spend alone in the US on an annual basis. It's one of the fastest growing, most competitive categories in all of marketing. Now, juxtapose that with the second number, 5%. 5% is the 30-day retention of an average customer.
Which is just so low, no matter what category you're talking about.
Well, it's actually the lowest of the top 15 categories.
Wow.
None of them have great, kind of 30-day retention because we live in such a commoditized, over-communicated environment where brands are really not connecting in a deep or long-term way, in the way maybe they have of the past. But yeah, it's pretty extraordinary. It means that you're losing 19 out of 20 customers in a 30-day period.
Yeah, that's kind of frightening. So obviously, goal of the campaign to build brand loyalty. So, walk me through, say, how the campaign came to be, how long it took to germinate, if you will. I should look for a pregnancy metaphor, but you'll find out in a minute. George will tell you.
There.
Yeah.
No, it was actually a campaign that was 3 years in the making. And we first presented the idea to Dave Tovar and his team in a pitch for Grubhub 3 years ago, almost to the day. And Dave had set a brief about loyalty that even he would admit he didn't know was possible. And we came at it, and our initial ideas were way off, honestly. We fell into a lot of the marketing traps of the short-termism. We came up with stunts and tactics and money offs, and then none of it felt like it could really swim against the tide of the rampant short-termism. But then we had one creative session where a young creative came in with a very different approach to loyalty. And it was an approach that seemed to us to run far deeper. And it was all based on a simple notion, which is some deliveries are more special than others. Yeah. And those times in life where you hear that truth and you think, we've got to mine that truth. So the truth became some deliveries are more special than others. And we just thought in that truth, there was an ability to run deeper, to create something that was more empathic. Rather than buying loyalty, maybe we could genuinely earn it. And so we set about that as a brief. And then we came up with one idea which seemed to us unbeatable in answer to that brief. And we realized there was one meal that was more special and anticipated than any other in life.
Which is?
It's the first meal mums have after giving birth. It's the postpartum meal.
When they can eat all those things they couldn't eat the whole pregnancy.
That have been off the charts, and so much so we even did some research because we weren't sure that we were onto something, right? So we did this kind of research and we found some extraordinary truth to back it up. One truth was that mums know what they're going to eat before they know the name of their child. 51% of mums look forward to their meal more than anything else post-delivery. And 54% of mums know precisely what they're going to eat in their first 6 months. it has to be the most anticipated meal of all time. So in that truth, we saw opportunity.
The funny thing about hearing about this campaign is you're like, great, but how do you execute it?
Right. And that was a big challenge for us, right? Because we knew that the upside had potential, but the downside had huge risk. If we were going to be a brand that was going to deliver on a postpartum promise to be invited into the recovery room, we better show up for them and for us. Like, we better not.
You can't screw this up.
It's a long way down, right?
Yeah.
So we built a different set of business cases. Like, how inclusive should it be? Should we geofence hospitals? It took us a long time because we had to do the work. And in the end, we identified one very inclusive way of doing it, which was to provide 5,000 meals for mums and their postpartum occasion in the biggest month for newborns of the year, which is August. So that's what we did last August. We enabled 5,000 mums to pre-book the meal that they wanted, and then we would show up after they gave birth with it. But more than that, if we were really going to show up for mums, we had to do something even further, because we realized this is just the start, right? The next 12 months
is chaos,
is untold, you know? And so what we did was we recognized, and with the Grubhub business, that we should also turn up for free for them for all of their baby needs over the next 12 months, from diapers to their first solids. So that's what we did. We called it special delivery. And then the key to it really was not advertising it, because we realized that ultimately we had to win trust. Yeah. And advertising, as you know, can be one of the most distrusted forms of media.
So no really big paid advertising campaign to go with.
We couldn't do it, right? Like, we could have potentially afforded it in a targeted way, but we made a strategic decision not to use advertising because it seemed to us it was loaded with distrust. And we realized that the one voice we needed was mums themselves. So our brief became create a community of mums that could advocate for this idea, to promote it. Mm-hmm. And what we ultimately needed to do was to earn mums' participation rather than broadcast to them.
Yeah. So I know from what you presented that this did really scale in an earned media capacity. So I'd love to know what you expected and what exactly happened.
Right.
Because you're certainly not guaranteed that this will happen, as lovely as the idea may be.
And you know, we'd done pre-audience research that suggested in a strong way that we would create more loyalty from the 5,000 mums and their families who were engaged in this. But we really were in an uncharted territory when it came to the broader conversation. But the results were extraordinary. Because we got mums on side, we just created this kind of wave of momentum. Not only did we deliver the 5,000 meals, but it was the fastest redeemed promotion in our history. Like, we dropped meals 4 times in the month and they sold out within 60 seconds. We created a national conversation. The media from national titles through to local titles was kind of unheralded. We created a 99% positivity, not just amongst the 5,000 mums, but amongst the kind of overheard conversation, which again, for a commodity sector, is unheard of. And then maybe the 2 most remarkable results of all. Remember we talked about at the beginning of this, that kind of 5% like loyalty.
Yeah.
We had to do the numbers twice because we didn't believe what we found at first. We created an increased loyalty of 54%. That's not just the mums who physically had the food delivered. That's amongst all mums who engaged with this idea.
Yeah, because I was going to say, how did that impact the people who heard about it, people who shared posts about it? You know, how does it scale so that it is a true branding moment and not, you know, sort of a bunch of social moments or a stunt? Because you could say, oh, that was a stunt, but that was not what you were looking to do.
And you know, as I said, like we created an idea that in the hundreds of thousands of mums who engaged with it, we created a loyalty of 10x versus the category. And the difference that makes to a modern business is just off the charts. for example, when they do the business modeling of this, they're then able to think not just about in the moment kind of revenue, but lifetime revenue, right? Because you're 10x, like the potential. This one piece of activity, which we delivered for a budget of just over $2 million, created a payback in terms of lifetime revenue of in excess of $220 million to the bottom line.
I know you're familiar with the paper, The Multiplier Effect, that we just launched. It's a really in-depth report.
Absolutely.
But I mean, what are your reflections on kind of combining long-term and short-term, the way that we sort of advocate for in the paper, that they should not be siloed?
I really appreciated seeing that. I'm a huge believer in like playing to win. And for me, the dance between brand and performance is precisely that. They're not solo activities.
Mm-hmm.
They need to work in concert together. And the work that you all are doing and have done that proves the case is a kind of landmark moment, really. And I'll use it very much in reference. Contextually, I think where it's really powerful in this conversation is our obsession with being in culture, of being in the moment, of being real time.
Mm-hmm.
Just because we can, it doesn't mean we should. And I believe that if brands are really going to build relationships as brands should, which are emotional and loyal and enduring, yes, they should be in the moment, but they need to be there for the longer term. And we have to create longer term thinking that runs deeper in building relationships with culture today.
So just last question is, what is your insight for brands in general about this? Because one thing that's really interesting about this is that it was not a big paid media campaign. And we hear at work all the time, and rightly so, from brands that are smaller and saying, well, that's great for a big brand with a huge ad budget, but that doesn't apply to me. Right. So especially with that audience in mind, like what's your...
We have a phrase at Golin, which is kind of a summary of our approach to life. We're an earned-led agency. We work with brands that want to earn their way into cultural conversations. And we have this belief that nothing is given, everything is earned.
Mm-hmm.
And we powerfully believe in that. We don't think you can buy your way in. We think you genuinely have to earn your way in. And so no matter the size of your budget, I think it's a fallacy to think that you can buy your way in now. So I would, to anybody with budgets of any size, I think it's remiss as a brand owner not to be leading with earned. The second thing I'd say about the work that we did here, and it's more of a personal truth, honestly.
Mm-hmm.
This thing took 3 years to come to life, right? We pitched the idea 3 years ago, and we shared a lot of the kind of obstacles and challenges that we went through together as a team with Grubhub today. But the one thing that I felt really powerfully through this is we had passion for that idea. And I really think in today's world, we have to hold on to precious things. Otherwise, I think we demean the sector that we're in. We undermine the power of our creativity, and we lose the potential to use our roles to lift ourselves up as like human beings and parents and creators. So that would be my call, would be like, let's hold on to precious things.
That's a great way to close. So thank you, George. We really appreciate having you on the podcast.
Such a pleasure to be here. Thank you for having me.
Our next guest is Elizabeth Paul, Chief Strategy Officer of the Martin Agency. She'll explain how the agency and its Solo Stove client built from the first round of the campaign, which became an industry lightning rod last year, to round 2, creating a brand platform powerful enough to drive a multiplier effect between brand impact and commercial importance. Interviewing Elizabeth is Work America's editor, Anne-Marie Kerwin.
Welcome, Elizabeth.
Thanks for having me.
So tell us about your 2-year journey with Snoop Dogg. How did you end up with the first campaign, and how did it lead into the second campaign?
Yep. So the TLDR is when we first started working with solo brands. They were very much like an indie darling in the direct-to-consumer world. Like a lot of DTC brands, they were born in 2008 alongside the Dollar Shave Clubs and the Bonobos and like all of those brands that it seemed like they came out of nowhere and suddenly they were everywhere. And they had grown really quickly for a number of years. But like a lot of direct-to-consumer brands in that category, there had been this sense that they had invented a new modern marketing playbook because they had disrupted distribution by going straight to consumers. And they didn't do traditional advertising and they didn't invest in brand. And there's probably a decade where that worked really, really well. Like for about a decade, if you had a great product, good design, and you understood digital marketing, it was like shooting fish in a barrel. But I think if you look at a lot of those competitors in the last 10 years, you've really seen what you guys describe as the doom loop and the multiplier effect, where, it's all lower funnel. And when you're only harvesting demand, but you're not, creating demand and investing in demand in the brand space, there's fewer and fewer returns over time. And I think what seemed like it was a brand new playbook actually was them kind of being first to the party with digital marketing, social media marketing. And as everyone took the page of that playbook and flooded into the space, customer acquisition costs have soared for every company, DTC brands and not alike. And because many of them weren't diversified in terms of their other marketing investments, a lot of that growth slowed down. So, Solo Stove had been in a similar journey, and the brief to us was they wanted to make the brand a household name, and they had never made an investment in brand before. We had no paid media budget. So just the idea production itself was kind of like all our chips were in that basket. So we had to engineer cultural impact into the idea, because if the idea didn't earn media, if it didn't get people talking, then literally no one was going to see it. So that's where we came up with the idea of taking their unique selling proposition, which they had invented the first smokeless Solo Stove. And we said, okay, who is synonymous with smoke and culture? Clearly, Snoop Dogg. What if he said he was giving up smoke? And when the idea was in the deck, it was one of many ideas. I don't think anyone thought they would say yes to it, and no one really was sure that Snoop would say yes to it.
Oh, that's a little bit of an impediment.
Yeah, I mean, you never know. Like when you're concepting ideas, you start with here's all the things you could do, and we knew we had landed a platform in Solo Stove Fix Fire, like at least for the fire pit. The idea of fixing fire. Whenever something violates the schema, when your brain sees something it expects to see, it fills in the blanks and it stops paying attention. That's why 84% of ads are never seen, because they look like the ad you expect to see. But when you see something that's like a little bit off, your brain doesn't know why. And it actually makes you like lean in and pay attention. And so even the language of "we fix fire," makes you kind of lean in and pay attention. So we knew we had a platform, but you never know what's going to get chosen out of it. Obviously, the first round had a lot of viral success, over $100 million worth of earned media. It definitely nailed the brief of making Solo Stove a household name. It was all anyone could talk about. But in the second round, the brief and the challenge was really to take all that newly found awareness and transmogrify that into consideration and even greater sales.
So your first go at it, a lot of the sort of input you got from the community was about it being very buzzy, but maybe not being very salesy.
Yeah. Well, so for the first few weeks, so it launched, I think the last day in November 2023. And for the first, 4 weeks, everybody was like, this is the most brilliant marketing of all time, because everybody was talking about it. Like we often talk at Martin about the taxi cab test. Like we don't want to just make stuff that other ad people are drilling over. We want to make stuff that like the taxi cab driver and like your grandma have heard of, like real people who buy real things in the world. And this was truly that. Like people who didn't pay attention to marketing had heard that Snoop had given up smoke. Everybody talked about it for 4 days. And then, everyone had fun with the fact that Snoop and Solo were kind of punking the internet. Like it was a joke. So at that point, most people knew that it was for a smokeless fire pit. And they are the Kleenex of that category. And so they both specifically benefit and, categorically benefit. But, shortly after, really just mere weeks after the CEO exited. And so then there was a swirl of question and conversation about whether or not it had worked. Now, some of the people in that conversation, on LinkedIn and the marketing punditry verse, correctly asked the question like, well, what was the brief? Did anybody really expect like just an awareness stunt to do everything? The answer is no, but we do believe that buzz drives business results, but it wasn't designed on the surface to be a full funnel campaign. It was really designed, to be about awareness. And so, yeah, the whole industry caught fire and it went viral a second time, but not in a good way. This time with everybody debating whether or not it had worked. And the reality is there are great results for the campaign, which the CMO shared Creative Impact this summer at Cannes, but they couldn't share them quite yet. And so in that kind of in between where we knew it had worked, but the world wasn't sure if it had worked, and we're debating furiously in the comment section, that's when we started to talk about, all right, well, for round 2, what if we lean into it? It's already a little bit meta. The critique is that it drove buzz, but you can't really do the hardworking type of marketing that you need to do where you talk about product features and functions and benefits, the stuff that is less poetry and more, blunt. And there's a little bit of a weed joke in there. And so round 2 was going from buzz marketing to blunt marketing and really putting all the things they said the campaign couldn't do front and center.
Okay, so you said that the first round didn't obviously drive sales, but we know that brand advertising does help lift all boats. So why don't you talk a little bit about what you saw behind the scenes that maybe you're allowed to talk about now that we weren't allowed to talk about then?
Sure. And again, as an agency, our positioning is that we fight invisibility, and we talk a lot about the fact that 84% of ads are never seen, right? People avoid ads and they lean into entertainment. And so if a brand can either be a part of entertainment culture or if a brand can become entertainment, which is what happened for those 4 days. People were having fun, hypothesizing and debating what in his life had happened that had made him give up smoke. They were acting like an entertainer, and the world loved that. All respect to Snoopy, he's an incredible entertainer, but he also reps dozens and dozens of brands. Most of them don't go viral. So it wasn't just that he was a celebrity, something else, was happening there. But we do know that the most talked about brand in a category grows 2.5 times faster. So if we can bet on buzz, strategic buzz, and getting the brand talked about, we believe it'll move the whole funnel. It just wasn't the initial brief. And so, as I said, it did drive a level of awareness that Luana Boumashar, their CMO, has said they never could have bought. They just didn't have, $100 million media budget, which is about, what this activation earned. So obviously, it worked on that level, but we also were able to track full funnel results, consideration, and sales. So on the consideration front, one of the things we wanted to make sure was it wasn't just that Snoop was trending, but Solo was trending. When we looked at search, we didn't want to just look at regular search where people might be curious about the celebrity news part of it. Was shopping search trending. And so when we saw that Amazon search exploded, Google shopping search exploded, people going to their website and signing up for the email subscription, which is typically what you do when either you want a coupon or you want that 10% off or free shipping, or if you want, it's the version of it's in my cart. I want it, but it might take me a few paychecks to, buy something at that price point. So we saw a lot of consideration signals. And then on the sales side, they did a dramatic drop in customer acquisition costs, an increase in sales, and an increase in average order value. So to your point about, brand amplifying performance, these brands that have done exclusively performance have a really well-tuned engine, but actually kind of pouring the motor oil of brand into that engine, it started revving harder and faster. So even though it was designed to do a brand job, it made the performance a lot more efficient and effective.
Well, I think you also hit on that strategy, the strategic insight that Snoop represented the what made Solo Stoves unique.
Yeah,
right?
He's synonymous with smoking culture. Yeah,
and being able to tie that together. And I think we heard that this morning from Moco talking about how ads sometimes fail if they have a great idea, but it doesn't link back to the strategic. So I think that was a key part of it. And we talk about that in the multiplier effect, how you need to have a brand platform that goes all across lots of different executions, which I think you found because it works in the performance marketing messages too, right?
I mean, one of the things we've been talking a lot about is brand world building. And so I'm really captivated by this apocryphal marketing story that I think it was 1915. Coca-Cola's brief to the glass blower who made their iconic bottle was, we want a design so distinctive, and they were all glass, this is pre-plastics, that if you dropped it on the sidewalk and it shattered into 100 pieces, someone could pick up any given piece and know that it was a Coke bottle. It was so singular. There's so much iconicity in the design. And I love that metaphor because that's how people experience brands today. They experience them shattered into 100 or 1,000 pieces all over the internet, like IRL and URL, through Creator, through Store, all these different places. And so I actually think, platforms, I agree, but I think the bigger and deeper opportunity is to create these really interesting brand worlds that, yes, have a platform in the center, but also thinking through the design language and what the brand stands for in the world and what are the stakes of that stand. And then actually taking the next step of discipline to say, great, what does this mean for our activations? What does this mean for our brand's role on culture? What does this mean, for our social playbook and so on and so forth? And so I love your thing about platforms. I think about it a little bit as brand worlds.
Oh, got it. Right.
Yeah.
Oh, it's okay. We can call it different things, but as long as you're doing it.
Yeah, exactly.
Yeah, that's great.
Thanks to Chris, George, and Elizabeth for being guests on the podcast. And thanks for listening. If you don't subscribe to the Work Podcast already, it's available on all of your favorite podcasting platforms. Goodbye, everyone.